All right, let's watch this Halo show. There's no way it's as bad as everyone says. Hey everybody, I'm a frog, and for some reason I decided to binge watch the Halo show over the course of a couple days, and yeah, I have a lot to say about it. More than I thought I would, to be honest. If you haven't seen the show and you do care, I'm gonna spoil everything about it, so turn back now. I think the best way to summarize the Halo show is that it doesn't know who it wants to appeal to, and it ends up appealing to nobody. Like, the show starts off with Quan Ha at her rebel outpost on the planet Madrigal, and people are telling her about how dangerous the Spartans are and stuff. Okay. And then she goes out and takes shrooms with her friends, and the Covenant show up and start killing people. You see kids getting their limbs blown off, like, alright, we're cooking a bit. She runs back to the outpost and starts warning everyone and is like, they're not UNSC, and before you know it, the Covenant show up and just start murdering everyone, and they're woefully unequipped to deal with them. Then Master Chief and his Spartan team, Silver Team, show up to save the day and start massacring the Covenant. The CGI in this opening scene looks pretty goofy, but whatever, that's fine. This is what, as a fan, I expected out of a Halo TV show. You set up the Spartans, then the evil Covenant shows up, and they're an overwhelming force, but here comes Jimmy Rings and pals to save the day. Now, in hindsight, I wish the Covenant had killed this girl, because in Season 1, we end up watching more of her running around the desert planet doing nothing than Master Chief fighting the Covenant. More on that in a bit. But the show starts off with a great opening, I think, for both Halo fans and for general audiences who don't know anything about Halo. Then it takes a turn. Chief finds this artifact, activates it, sees some memories from his childhood, and is rattled a bit. Chief and Quan Ha get on a Pelican ride to Reach, but the UNSC has ordered Quan Ha to be killed because she's the daughter of a rebel leader and refuses to publicly speak about how the Covenant attacked her planet and the Spartans saved her and threatened to say the Spartans attacked instead. The main plot of the rest of the episode is Chief trying to grapple with killing her until he decides to disobey orders, not kill her himself, and fly Quan to another planet to keep the UNSC from doing it when they land. It's a moral dilemma thing happening, which is fine, but I don't think it works this early into the show. We're told that the Master Chief is this dependable killing machine who always gets the job done, and we see a bit of that, and then immediately after we see him break from that because he touched this Forerunner artifact. That kind of a change can work, but it has to be with a character that we spent enough time with. In the context of the show, we don't see enough of normal Chief to really appreciate the change that's happening, so a dilemma like this that challenges him and starts a shift in another direction I think should have been saved for another couple episodes. We should have seen more of the normal Master Chief rather than just being told about it. Like in the TV show Dexter, Dexter's a serial killer and a sociopath, and we see that. We see him brutally murder people and not have emotions, and over the course of the entire show they start introducing things that make him question who he is. But they don't start this immediately in episode 1. They let us see normal Dexter in his normal routine first for a while. The TV show format lends itself to longer and slower character development. And this is where I think part of the show being confused comes in, because it's trying to appeal to more than just fans of the games. However, it seems to be relying on what we've seen from the games for that characterization and backstory rather than delivering it itself. It assumes we've already seen Master Chief enough in outside material to where it doesn't need to do that job itself. But again, if you're trying to tell your own story, I think that's a huge misstep. Another example that I was legitimately shocked by was with Captain Keyes, Miranda, and Halsey. So Halsey's the scientist who created the Spartan program, and Miranda Keyes is another scientist person in the UNSC whose dad is Captain Keyes. In her first scene with her dad, she's talking about Halsey and how Halsey doesn't believe in her. I don't know much about Halo lore, but I did know that Halsey was Miranda's mom. I thought that was going to be a twist. Like, oh man, Halsey's my superior. I don't get why she's always so tough on me, yada yada yada. And sometime later, it would be revealed that Halsey is your mom, and it would be a big moment. As I was completing this thought, Miranda in her conversation literally says something like, well, I guess that's just how it goes when Dr. Halsey's your mom. And it's like, why are you telling the audience that right away? If you think your audience is all Halo fans who would already know that, then sure, that makes sense, but that's not who your audience is. You're clearly trying to appeal to people who wouldn't already know that. Why wouldn't you use that information for a reveal or a twist or something, or use it for character development throughout the show? It doesn't make any sense. And with the way it's written currently, it's not like there is a good reason to know that information off the bat. They may as well not be related. At the very least, let the audience know in maybe a private conversation between Captain Keyes and Halsey, and keep Miranda Keyes in the dark so we have dramatic irony. I don't know. Do something with it. You may think I'm making a big deal out of something small, but I think it's a microcosm of a bigger issue with the show, and this is the first example that I noticed in the show. I will say, too, the acting in the show I thought would be bad, but it was actually pretty great. There weren't any actors who stood out to me as terrible. Halsey, Captain Keyes, Kai, later Ackerson jump out as characters who were really well acted. The first episode also introduces this Lady McKee, who we come to find out was kidnapped by the Covenant as a kid because she has a special power to activate Forerunner artifacts, which is a power also shared by Master Chief. I think Makee is an interesting character, and I'll now take a second to talk about the first season more broadly. So during the first season, there's a bunch of different plot lines happening with the UNSC and Halsey and Makee and a bunch of other smaller ones, but the main two are Master Chief and Quan Ha. After getting rescued by Chief, Quan's whole plot is about returning to her home planet of Madrigal with the help of Soren, an ex-Spartan, and freeing them from this evil ruler guy who you probably remember as a scientist from that one episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Part of what makes him evil is that instead of Madrigal being independent, he wants to ally with the UNSC. Now, the problem with the Quan Ha stuff is that Quan Ha is an awful, unlikable character, and none of what she does on Madrigal matters. The Covenant's going around glassing planets trying to exterminate the human race, and I'm supposed to care about this stupid political thing on some planet I've never heard of. Not to mention, Quan Ha hates the bad guy because he wants to ally with the UNSC, right? But the opening of the show shows why that's not a bad thing. Your entire rebel outpost that you grew up on was obliterated in 3 minutes with no resistance until the Spartans showed up to save you. Sorry, but I don't think allying with the UNSC is really a bad deal. But even putting that aside, yeah, it just doesn't matter. To start Season 2, Keyes mentions briefly, oh yeah, Madrigal? Yeah, it got glassed, everyone's dead. None of it matters. And they completely failed at making me care. Every time I come back to Quan's story, I was tempted to fast forward. There's an entire episode just about Quan. The only reason I didn't skip it was because I had to make this stupid video, and in hindsight, I wish I did skip it, and I had that hour of my life back, because all I have to say about it is that it sucks. Makee I thought was more interesting than Quan, and eventually she does team up with the Master Chief, and stuff happens. But prior to that, I think Makee should have been treated as the B story rather than Quan. So rather than mainly following Chief in this other story no one cares about, it would be Chief and a member of the Covenant whose stories eventually come together. Kind of like Chief and the Arbiter, although Chief and Makee have a bit of a different relationship, unless I guess you consider Chief Arbiter Rule 34 stuff. Anyway, along with the A and B plots, so much of the first season, I think to justify the Quan stuff, is spent on internal politics, and actually the UNSC is bad too stuff. There's just so much stupid political nonsense happening between Halsey, Keyes, Parangoski, and whoever else's name I've already forgotten. Like, again, I don't care, or at least not to the extent that the show wants me to care. Stuff like Halsey doing ends justify the means stuff, like kidnapping children to turn them into Spartans. Yeah, that's interesting and it raises a moral question, and you can certainly have scenes where the various characters come to terms with this and give their thoughts. But I don't need 90% of the scenes involving humans to be two people with a disagreement trying to outmaneuver each other for power. Rather than the focus being on humans versus Covenant, it's primarily humans versus humans, which for a Halo show just doesn't work, at least not in how they executed it. Again, I think some of this would have been fixed just by putting more focus on Makee rather than Quan. But speaking of Makee, let's talk about her love interest, the Master Chief. First off, a lot has been made of Chief not wearing his helmet. I don't mind them showing what he looks like, but it does get to a point of absurdity when he's taking his helmet off every 5 seconds when on missions and still in dangerous situations. And taking his helmet off should be like The Mandalorian, where it happens, but it's few and far between. But it's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of the show. I've already spoken about the show seeming to rush into his character arc, but it's not just that it's rushed. I think it goes way too far into the I'm not a machine, I'm a highly emotional man thing. He's the Master Chief. He's supposed to be this stoic, larger-than-life killing machine and a legend that everyone looks up to. But before we know it, he's disobeying orders and getting super emotional and trying to kill Halsey and f***ing a POW, and he becomes an absolute train wreck. It starts prior, but it is shown in the show too that he removes this emotional regulator thing out of his lower back and suddenly has feelings and emotions like a real person. Which is interesting, but I don't think they should have ever made him as emotional and incompetent and crazy as he ends up becoming. He's Master Chief. No one wants to see Master Chief having a mental breakdown. I think if they wanted to explore that, they should have done it more with Kai, the other Silver Team Spartan who also takes out her emotional blocker thing. They have Kai mess with her hair after, which is the stereotypical thing women do when they're having issues, and she gets shell-shocked during a fight, but overall she keeps her composure better than Chief does. I think the better approach would have been to have Chief be able to handle it, whereas Kai can't. Master Chief shows that he's strong enough to keep his composure and be who he needs to be, even without being completely under Halsey's control. But Kai falls apart and shows that she can't handle it, showing the danger of Spartans having emotions and giving credence to Halsey's side of the argument. On the other hand, let's go back to Makee for a second. Master Chief, deep in his emotions, decides to go to Makee's holding cell and, put his activation index in her receptacle? In a really weird scene where, one, I guess they just don't have cameras in her prison room, and two, it awkwardly cuts back and forth between them and Cortana watching them in an unintentionally hilarious way. Now, obviously, this is a really stupid thing, and I don't know how the writers thought it was a good idea to make Master Chief do that. But if they were so desperate for a romance in this show, which I'm not saying there needed to be, but if they wanted one, I think the obvious direction to go in that would have made Master Chief not look like an idiot would be Kai. Like, without their emotion blockers, you have them fall in love, and either Kai gets killed in battle, or Kai gets in trouble, causing Chief to divert his focus from what he's supposed to do, leading to a mission failure, or a bunch of people dying, or something like that. Either way, you harden him and he learns that he needs to always put the mission first and not have attachments like that. Instead, you have him taking walks in the park with a Covenant lady who isn't even trying to pretend she's good, like she's literally telling the Master Chief about how they need to find Halo and activate it to start the great journey. If you haven't seen the show, I'm serious. I'm not exaggerating. Everyone else is like, I don't know if we can trust this lady, and she's not even pretending to not be evil, and Master Chief's like, oh, don't mind if I do. I mentioned Cortana. Jen Taylor does a great job as the voice of Cortana, of course, but one of the things in the show that I didn't like was how they utilized Cortana. Or underutilized her, for that matter. Instead of being a sidekick like in the games where she gives intel and provides some comic relief and she builds a bond with the Chief, she mostly just hangs out with Halsey. There is some of that where she helps him look up information and she gives him advice in a fight, but for the most part, she isn't in the show nearly as much as I thought she would be, which feels like a missed opportunity. In the show, one of the plot points is that if Chief gets too out of control, Cortana can take over his brain and body as a failsafe and be Master Chief herself, if that makes sense. It's kind of weird. But nonetheless, in the Season 1 finale, Silver Team is surrounded against impossible odds, and Chief dies on purpose so that Cortana can do this and take him over, and funny enough, it's really the only time in the whole season where Master Chief acts like Master Chief, and it's not even him. It's Cortana in control of his body. The best way I can describe Season 1 is that it's a bad story told incompetently, whereas Season 2 is a bad story told competently. I think Season 2 was a lot better than Season 1. Season 2 opens with Silver Team on some planet that's being invaded by the Covenant, and Chief goes to find some lost Marines, and they get ambushed by a bunch of elites in a scene that's better than any of the action in Season 1. This episode introduces us to Perez, the lone survivor from this encounter besides Chief, and we meet Ackerman, the new director of the Spartan program, after Halsey was in prison at the end of Season 1. While recording this, for some reason, I thought his name was Ackerman. It's Ackerson. I'm sorry. I'll keep a counter for how many times I say Ackerman through the rest of this video. So Ackerman is really well acted, and he works in the context of the story, but the problem is the story because the whole season basically just boils down to Ackerman trying to get rid of the Spartan 2s, including Master Chief, so that he can work on his own secret Spartan program. Which is really dumb. Ackerman starts trying to paint Master Chief out as unfit for duty, and everyone buys into it, even though, he's the Master Chief. So the human versus human stuff I think is better in Season 2, but it still just feels like too much of the show's focus goes to these conflicts as opposed to what's more interesting, the war versus the Covenant. In the middle of Season 2, it does change a bit because the Covenant attacks Reach, which I thought was well done, at first. He's in a church with Perez, she's playing a Covenant prayer for him, and then the Covenant start dropping bombs outside. Then in the next episode, they're running around trying not to get killed, and they run by Perez's apartment, and her building gets blown up, and all her family is dead. Fine enough. They fight to the UNSC headquarters without a suit, and a few scenes I thought were cool, but then they get there and are told, sorry, your suit isn't here. And I groaned because I knew that meant he wasn't going to be in a suit for a while. I do think seeing them fight without suits in this season works. It makes sense in the story, but still, call me monkey brain. I want to see Master Chief in his suit fighting aliens. Season 2 has the same problem as Season 1, where it spends too much time on a subplot that I didn't really care about. This time it's Soren, his family, and Quan. So Soren gets taken in by the UNSC and his wife's son, and Quan try to leave before Soren's pirate friends kill them. Quan ends up killing them and saving Soren's wife, but their son was on a transport ship, and he's somewhere else now. Soren gets free during the attack on Reach, and there's a couple episodes where him and his wife just try to find their son. It does tie into the main plot better than Quan's story in Season 1. This side plot takes the whole gang to Onyx, where Ackerman's secret Spartan program is, and after being absent during the Battle of Reach, it turns out Kai was on Onyx acting as a trainer for the new Spartans. Oh yeah, and Perez is also a Spartan 3 apparently, which is really weird because a few days earlier she was just a random Marine. I don't think the Spartan 3 program is really explained as well as it should be. Like, they could have put more time into world building it in the show. I think that's another example where they rush it for whatever reason, and despite it being a show for non-fans, it's as if they expect you to already know what the Spartan 3s are in lore. Soren's son is in the program and they rescue him. Master Chief goes inside and has a battle with Kai before she realizes she's dumb and Ackerman is the bad guy, and they find Master Chief's suit. Quan accompanies Halsey to an underground place where they find Miranda Keys, and the most interesting subplot of the entire show happens. Earlier in the season, Quan was talking about monsters and had this star thing in the wall, and there was some mystical stuff with this weird old lady, and that comes to a head in this room where there's this star puzzle that Quan knows the key to. So she solves it, a door opens, and it reveals a Forerunner city and a lab outside that has a symbol you may recognize from the Halo 1 level 343 Guilty Spark. They grab a sample from the lab and the whole thing starts falling apart. They get back to the room with the stars, and now a bunch of them are red, and Quan freaks out and runs away. Keys brings a sample back to the lab and starts working on it, and it's the Flood, and an outbreak starts. I really liked how the Flood were done in the show. I saw people saying on Twitter it's bad because they're just generic zombies, but okay. They were infected by spores and are in the early stages of infection. It makes sense that infection forms and combat forms and all that stuff wouldn't come until later on in a flood outbreak. And you do see a couple people who are deeper into the infection and start to resemble combat forms more. It is also cool to see Parangoski get jumped by like 8 infected people after all the stuff she pulled in the show. But I do think there is too much happening at the end of Season 2 with the Spartan 3 program, McKee and the Arbiter, Soren's thing, the Flood, and them actually finding the Halo Ring. But yeah, I did like watching Season 2. I think it was definitely an improvement over the disaster class that was Season 1. Overall, the show I think fails at being something for the fans, obviously because most fans of the games don't like the show, but it's not good enough to appeal to people who don't already like the IP, and it's mixed in with some weird storytelling decisions that you wouldn't think they'd make unless it was just supposed to be a show for the fans. But as critical of the show as I've been, Season 2 was interesting enough, and I'll be interested in Season 3 and seeing what they do with the Flood. Thanks to my patrons whose names are on screen now for supporting the channel, and if you like this video, click the one on screen to see my review of Halo 4's campaign. I'll catch you next time.